my pleasure that we have here with us today Chris South, who actually is quite a familiar face to a number of you guys. Last fall, he left Blackbaud after working there for a little over 11 years to start a company called Perform Match. They help nonprofits increase their matching gift revenue with data, best practices, and technology integration with CRM. A number of people have also mentioned that they knew him when he worked at Target Analytics, and I don't want to go through too much of his background because I know that he's going to go through that. But today he is going to help us look at product positioning and sales segmentation and really have a data-driven focus. You've noticed a lot of the theme that we've had in the last several months are data. It's a big word, and he's going to show us how we're going to use that for product positioning and sales segmentation. All right.
Super. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Ernest, for inviting me to come in this morning. I appreciate it. So I'm going to go through kind of a high-level framework, and it's going to talk more about kind of my experience at Blackbaud. I'm not going to spend so much about what I've done at Perform Match. Be happy to kind of talk about that if you guys are interested. But I'm going to talk more about kind of experiences I had, again, leading an analytics team, but how do I do that to focus on the market that we were going after. So I'll give you an explanation of kind of what it is as we go through this to understand the framework, but hopefully you'll be able to take away pieces of it to kind of help in your area as you guys look at how it applies to your business. So before I go through the agenda, I kind of wanted to, again, talk about kind of the framework of what is in what I'm going to be talking about today and what's not in what I'm going to be focused on today. So at Blackbaud, we use pragmatic marketing as kind of the framework for much of the product management that we did there. And it's a pretty comfortable, easy framework that is out there. There's a ton of materials. Their website is pretty open. If you guys want to just read any of their PDFs to understand kind of what they do. I'll probably focus a little bit more on pragmatic, but I'm not going to take you through the ins and outs of it. But the area that I wanted to kind of bring out here is it really focuses on the market that you understand. And I know that I'm speaking to the digital corridor, which is kind of incubator and early stage. So I wanted to also mention what it's not. So there's another methodology, and I've been reading on this again from my own company. How do you focus on something where you don't know the market? You're trying to figure out the market. Customer development is a pretty good methodology. There's a couple great books on it out there. There's one, The Entrepreneur, Early Entrepreneur, I think is the title that I just finished reading. And it talks a bit more about kind of a pivotal process to go through iterative design to figure out what's my market, how do I validate it before I scale the business. So I'm not going to talk as much about that today. Again, focusing a bit more on kind of value propositions, understanding problem solution based markets. So again, help you understand kind of the basis of where I'm coming from. And it will be a bit more B2B focus as opposed to business to consumer focus as I go through it this morning. So on the agenda, I'm going to spend more time on the market analysis strategic plan. Again, the caveat or the syllabus was how do you take a strategic plan down to C level? So I want to focus on the strategic plan and getting it down to the C level and the right metrics you need to measure and track that. And I'm going to go through a couple of steps on the breadcrumb to get you there, but I'm not going to go through a ton of detail around it, but I want you to at least follow the thought process I'm taking to get it down to C level. So I'll talk a little bit about product positioning, a little bit of go-to-market, a little bit about quota development from a sales perspective, and then diving in more deeply on kind of the measures and the effectiveness of how I'm going against my plan. Make sense? Okay. So, thank you, Amy, for getting started about me. A couple of slides real quickly to help you understand kind of my perspective of how I'm coming at this problem today. So, about 30 years as a technology executive, definitely a business focus. I've done everything from consulting to CIO to running a business unit, but it's always been around technology application. How do I take an application and solve a business problem? A number of industries, software nonprofits were where I was most recently, but I've worked in telecommunications, manufacturing, and forest products too over the years. Sales and operations most recently with Blackbaud, but again, consulting and technology. And fundamentally, I think a lot of my experience has been really around this data focus. And again, the business unit I was running was analytics for Blackbaud, which was predictive modeling, data services, and reporting was a lot of the focus. But as part of selling that to the customers, it kind of we ate our own dog food. How do we make sure we're going after the right market? Love the quote from Deming. I've seen a lot of people use variations on this since World War II. In fact, if you look, there's a great article, Harvard Business Review article, Competing on Analytics, that was done a number of years ago by Davenport that you guys may have read. A number of different people are mentioned in that article. One of it's Harrah's, and the guy there almost verbatim used the same quote. Making it driven by the data that you bring to the table. Where are you? Let's validate your hypothesis with data. How do I kind of look at that along the way? So that's a lot of where my experience has been. And then lastly, I mentioned this briefly, but kind of what I've done at Blackbaud on the analytics business. When I took over running it, it was about a $7.5 million business. After a few acquisitions, we were close to a $40 million business a number of years later. Again, data services, predictive modeling, financial reporting, benchmarking reporting, financial reporting for nonprofits. So, enough about me. Let's kind of dive into what I'm talking about for strategic plan, the market analysis. But I thought I'd bring a little humor first before we jump into it. I love Dilbert. It's kind of one of those classic business cartoons. Numbers, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. There's definitely the angle of be honest in your numbers. Let's kind of look at that overall. People will believe in them, but you got to have something to support them as you go through it. So when I've looked at kind of strategic plans, and at Blackbaud, we would do a strategic plan for a business unit every 3 to 5 years, and we'd kind of look at what's the market we're going after, what's the overall segmentation, where are we in that penetration, and then build all our annual plans based on that. And every year you come back to your strategic plan and say, is it still valid? Do I need to tune it a little bit? What are the metrics? What's the basis for that? And the way that we did it was getting it down to what's the individual market that we're going after? Who is the individual buyer? And we looked at it kind of two different ways, a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So, and there's really no right way to do it. You got to go through a couple different iterations, which is why we did kind of a top-down and a bottoms-up approach. You need to kind of validate your numbers along the way. But the big thing is you got to document your assumptions, because when you come back and review your plan 12 months from now, if you don't remember how you got to those numbers or what the basis of those numbers are, you spend a lot of time reinventing the wheel again. So as thoroughly as you can, understand, document what's the basis for it that's out there. So from a top-down perspective, and what I'm going to try and focus on as we talk today, I'm going to try and use higher ed as kind of a thematic approach as we go through this, because that's one of the markets that I focused on a lot in my last business. So I'm going to try and use that as the example. And I use that for some of the numbers that we'll run through, even though these are kind of cleansed numbers. But if you look at a top-down approach to get to how many higher eds are there in North America, Google's kind of a great place to start, or there's a lot of key stats that you can get from the government as well. How many nonprofits are there out there? And for nonprofits, it's a pretty easy classification. There's a government classification of a 501c3 that tells you how many nonprofits that are out there. So there's pretty good data anytime government kind of collects it out there. To get to the thing that we care about is how many raise a significant amount of money, and in this case, the government tracks anybody that fills out a report that's over $25,000 a year in revenue. We can get a stat that pretty easy again from the government. It's about 300,000 of those. Then within that, we can say, okay, of all the 300,000 nonprofits, how many of those are higher ed? Again, a decent government number you can get to, about 4,500. And then if we start cutting it by the revenue numbers within that, we can see there's about 10% of those that raise $50,000 or more, which leaves about 400 targets for this particular, made-up product that I'm talking about today. There would be 400 that kind of meet the overall market that we think that spend over $50,000 a year. Make sense so far? So if we look at a bottoms-up approach, again, What's a different way to validate? Are there about 4,500 higher eds out there? How do I kind of get to that? So there's a couple other data sources that you can get in the higher ed space, and there's a lot of other ones you can go between Dun & Bradstreet, InfoSystem, a number of different sources for data like this. But again, for today's example, I'm going to talk about data that I had accessible to me. GuideStar, which is a nonprofit itself that tracks other nonprofits. It tracks and reports all the government filings that are out there and helps you understand in more detail how many are out there. They have a classification. They have 4,700 in their database that you can license and use to say how many are out there. Carnegie is a totally different solution. Carnegie is the one that kind of goes through the certification process of, are you a level 1, a level 2, are you certified? Higher ed out there, they have a database also by classification, Carnegie classification. They have 4,600, right? So we're pretty close to the number I came up already, so we did a little bit of validation in the process. The key is you're always going to get conflicts between your different sources. You got to get, at least the sniff test to say, am I close? Because what's going to be the basis for a lot of the analysis that we're going to use as we go through this overall process. Understand, test the assumptions, and occasionally you have to do a deep dive. And one of the things that I found is, I did a lot of pivot tables. You'll see some of the examples as we go through this. I double click into a cell to say, what makes up that cell? Who is in that? Is that a reasonable set of organizations that raise above 50,000? Are the kind of organizations I would have expected to see in that individual cell? And if they're not, I could have some data source issues, I could have some classification issues. I could come back and say, maybe this data is not as good as I thought it was going to be helpful for me. So you got to do those deep dives to validate it as you go through. Where you can get more detail, it's going to be helpful as you go later on down the road. And the examples that I kind of mentioned here are things around demographic additions, predictive observation, self-identification. So location, is kind of an easy one. What state, what zip code are they in? Are they sub-classifications that are out there? So again, in higher ed, I might want to know public versus private, right? So that's a pretty big indicator. It might help me figure out for this particular product that I'm selling, I might find public has a higher need than private. I want to be able to know that. A 2-year versus a 4-year. Is there a religious affiliation to the organization? So the more data you can get, it can help me do deeper dives and deeper segmentation to help me understand what's out there. And then it can also help me as we look at existing customers. What are the classifications? What categories are these existing customers falling within? It'll help me use that as a predictive capability of, hey, I found a lot of Baptist-influenced schools tend to have bought this product. Is there something unique around Baptist-influenced schools that I can figure out where more are and use that as a particular target that I want to go after? So again, it helps me understand existing customers as well as prospect customers. Make sense? So if we get the high-level approach, using a top-down and a bottoms-up approach of how many are in market or how many are there potentially in the market, the next question is how many are in market? And I use that terminology to say, what's the frequency that they might buy this product? Is it a product that they're going to buy every year that's a service? Or is it a CRM product that they're going to buy once every 7 or 10 years? So I think you got to kind of think about what's the timing of the need, because that'll help you influence kind of budget cycles that are out there. So you got to think about, again, the end market as we go through this. So the example I used is for some particular markets, once every 7 years might be the period that an organization thinks about changing their CRM. So if you just do the simple math, that means about 14% of your population could be in market in any year. Again, these are general thematic numbers, directions that kind of help you understand how many potentially I could sell to in a year. Could be higher one year, lower the next year, but it gives me at least a cycle to say, as I plan, I should be able to get a percentage of those that are in market. And second, this will kind of link in as we go down to the breadcrumbs I mentioned to you earlier. Everything I've been talking to now is more the numbers side of getting my market plan, my strategic plan. There's some of the softer side of it that you're going to see as we get down into the product positioning. But one of the key things that I've done when I've done kind of market plans on an annual level is one of the good old SWOT analysis that you probably learned about in business school. It's a great tool to help give other people that are going to use this information, people in marketing, the people in sales, to help understand how your product fits vis-a-vis competitors and how you think you stand versus the landscape. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, internal versus external. When I've done it, just make it bullet oriented. For the particular product and market that you're thinking about that we kind of broke through, I said, okay, these are Baptist oriented, higher ed. What makes us different from the competitors? What's their opportunity? What's their problem that I'm solving that's out there? How do I fit? So if I fill out a couple of bullets in each cell, this can be a very helpful process to take into my next step in the design. So this slide's a bit busy, but bear with me as I kind of walk through it. But this is kind of one of the key deliverables in the strategic plan that I put in place, and the numbers have been sanitized. But it's kind of the culmination of all the stuff that we just went through. So on the left, you see the market that's out there. I kind of built a traditional pyramid that's out there. So again, I'm going to use this higher ed number of 4,700 organizations that were Carnegie classification. The great thing is I told you it had a lot of other information. One of them was the contribution level. Contribution is one definition of revenue in higher ed. There could be grants, there could be program services, tuition. Contribution is the income they receive from individual donations. And this particular product XYZ that we're talking about, helps them do a better job managing that particular part of their revenue stream. So I want to look at where they fit based on their spend, their collection of revenue, and spend is kind of inferred as a result of that. So I put each of the number, so if I were to drill into each of these cells, I'd see what higher eds of the ones that earn over $100 million a year, who are those 65 organizations. So again, as I mentioned to you, you got to do those deep dives occasionally to say, is it reasonable? Is it the sanity number that's out there? So I took them all, stratified them across each of the contribution levels. And each of these columns helped me ultimately get to the annual revenue opportunity. So propensity to purchase, so this is based on your experience of who are the kind of people that make up in each of these cells. How likely are they to buy a product like this product XYZ? And this particular product I'm talking about tends to stratify to the higher end of the scale. Those that are more sophisticated have a higher need for this particular product. As you could drive all the way to the bottom, a very tiny percentage of them. In fact, they really shouldn't be buying, but there's probably a few exceptions that they found a need for it and they decided they needed this particular product. So it's going to be law of really small numbers. But so more sophisticated tend to buy it. So math exercise, this tells me what the addressable market is. So there could be some public institutions in here that don't need this particular product because they don't have this regulatory requirement, as an example. I'm making it up at this point. But so there's some way to get to this addressable market. The next one is layer in your existing customers. So again, go back to the beginning of this. This is kind of a known market. I understand who I'm going after. So hence, I've got some customers that have been buying in the past already. How many do I have? So as you can see, it tends to stratify more to a sophisticated buyer. There's a few outliers down here that have bought in the past. Average revenue, based on this particular product, it stratifies either by a seat license or more particular needs around it. Don't know what it is, but they tend to spend, the average sales price, ASP, tends to be a higher number at the higher end of the scale versus the ones at the bottom. Then I've got what my target percentage is. At the beginning of the slide, I said, okay, we think we can get about 10% of the market. If I look at the whole overall thing, that may be true, but again, as I stratify within the market, the higher ones, I should get a higher percentage opportunity for those, and a small percentage as I get down there. So I can go back to the end market. How many people buy this annually? This particular product we're talking about tends to be an annual product. People that buy it less infrequently, or maybe they bought it for a one-off need for a campaign or some reason like that, but most people need this product every year, so there's a number of percentage in year is 100. And then again, a math exercise to get me to what the opportunity is. So I can kind of stratify to say, okay, most of my revenue opportunity is going to be up here in the 30 million and above, 10 million and above, and then it drops off dramatically after that. So that helps me understand as I start building my individual plans, my market opportunities. I want to have people that are going to be more sophisticated salespeople. They're going to go to the higher end of the market, probably a longer sales cycle, but it helps me start thinking about those things that I'm going to take to the next step in my process. Yes?
Seems like all of this is driven by that first propensity to purchase column. And I wonder how you calculate or arrive at those percentages.
So it's a number based on experience, right? So it's kind of I wouldn't say there's anything scientific with it, but we went through, in this particular product that we went through, we looked at the customers that were out there. We looked at the ones that we'd done sales to in the past, the sales that we had lost. It was all part of the analysis that you went through to come up with how many of these people could buy or need this particular product. So it's a bit out of the air, but it's based on the experience of, hey, we've been selling to this market for a while, here's the kind of needs that are out there, or here's the upcoming capabilities we're adding into the product next year. It should be able to bring a larger percentage of people back into the market that we need to. But it's based on experience. Others? So again, as I was mentioning, that's kind of the key deliverable, one of the key deliverables out of the strategic marketing plan. There's other pieces that you need. The SWOT analysis is kind of the softer side of things that you'd want to have in it, but the strategic plan was one of the key documents that we delivered to other teams that were out there to help them take the strategic plan down to the execution level, the C level that I kind of talked about. So it's kind of the key point. The next couple things I want to talk about are kind of the breadcrumbs to then get you down to the execution level. What are the other things that you need from other teams or other things you need to deliver along the way to get me down to the individual steps and the things I want to measure myself against to make sure I'm delivering on this plan. I was looking for actually the exact quote in Alice in Wonderland. A lot of people have kind of synthesized it into, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. This is kind of the exact quote that I found. But the essence is, you gotta try and think about how I'm going to take the strategic plan and how I'm going to give it to the individuals to make sure they're executing and delivering on that path. So you need, in order to get to your roadmap, your path, you need to give people these other documents to help them understand how to build it along the way. So the positioning that I'm going to talk about is kind of one of those key things to get you everybody moving down that same path. But again, I thought it was kind of a cute analogy. So product positioning is really, it's a key linkage opportunity, and I lived and breathed by this. Everything from building your personas of your potential buyers, your stories, to ultimately your positioning statement. Such a key document for everybody to kind of live and work from. So it's definitely my linkage from my marketing plan down to execution. So everything from MarCom, marketing communications, and your sales enablement. So I want to make sure I'm training people based on where I want to go. What's my target market I want to go after? I want people get me leads that are going to get into that particular target market. I want sales pursuing leads, and I want sales going after that particular market. You're going to get bluebirds, and you're going to get occasional ones in there, but you want to always test it against that positioning statement, that approach that I'm going after. You may purposely choose to adjust and go after some outliers, but you want to purposely do that because that can get you so far down the weeds and off the track, and before you know it, you're having to look at other features and capabilities to meet this outlier that take you off your main path. So it's kind of the key path to get you along the way. I can't emphasize that enough. You want marketing, creating all your content and all your lead generation materials based on the same segmentation, the same approach, because that's the kind of people you want to attract into your lead pool, right? Sales enablement, you definitely want your training and your all your positioning statements and your sales collateral based on the same materials. And it ultimately takes, again, the linkage of the strategy down to my pursuits level. It's focused so much on value, right? So what problem am I solving for my customers, right? So as you clearly understand what that is, that's the thing you want to build and make sure my product is delivering and solving that customer's problem. So as long as you've got that as the focus, that'll help you deliver the value statement around that. And then obviously what value, what ROI, what's the return on investment the customer is going to get from my particular product. So the value proposition, for those of you that have gone through this, bear with me, but you want to clearly get to the compelling reason for your product or your service. You want to make sure it leverages and iterates the segment that you're focused on, and you want to make sure it's going after solving that individual's problem. How am I going to make it easier? So this is an example from Crossing the Chasm. Chasm, it's an old book that is a great one around thinking about product positioning. So the key statements, the for, who, the, that, unlike our product. This is an example from Kindle. For travelers who read a lot, the Kindle is an electronic book reader that puts thousands of books at your fingertips. Unlike Apple's iPad, you can use our reader for weeks on a single charge. So it gets each of those key statements down to a very clear level very quickly. And again, if everybody's using this as the approach from marketing to sales, I'm now taking that segmentation that I put in place and I'm running it all the way through to be consistent. If I choose differently and learn different things, I can iterate it back up through the process. So again, just wanted to plant a little bit of a seed, again, taking it down to the next level. So we'll talk a little bit about go-to-market. So how do I take these concepts and how am I going to start building my execution plan to get there? So again, just a taste of where I want to go. So I'm going to talk mostly today around kind of a direct or a channel approach. Again, my experience at Blackbaud is kind of bringing a B2B approach. So it's really about how do I get that product through those channels. So as I think about the business model, some of the things you want to think about as you get ready to build your market plans in your territories, how am I going to go to market? Based on the needs, remember we talked about the example XYZ product, higher ed tended to be a more sophisticated, more complex environment. They have a higher revenue level, implied they have a larger organization, probably more sophisticated buyer, higher budget that was out there. So I need to think about how do I build a team to go capture that particular market. Different ways you can kind of think about it. Do you want to break out prospects versus customers? So some people use the term back to base or inside outside. Different teams that are small incremental transactions versus new customers. You often need different sales talent in order to go after those kind of markets as well. So you got to kind of think of, that's one way you can break up teams. Another very easy way is geographic. That's probably one of the ways that people really get started is I'm going to break it up by state, I'm going to break it out by part of the country. That's a very easy one to go through. Target size of organization in the higher ed market, that definitely portrayed as one of the things I wanted to think about. How do I build a team to go after the higher ed market? Again, more sophisticated buyers, have a higher budget cycle that was out there. I want to think about those. Strategic versus transactional buyers. Is this somebody I can just have on the phone making calls to take orders, or do I need face-to-face interaction because it's a longer sales cycle to go out there? I might have different teams that can go after it that way. And then specialty knowledge. Are there particular things? Higher ed definitely felt that approach. People that can iterate, talking about alumni needs versus other plan-giving constituents. Excuse me. The types of people that I might hire to build and go after the higher ed team would be different than maybe the transactional, the inside sales team as well. So as I start thinking about how do I put territories together after I've taken this approach, I don't want to break it out into geographic or to particular type of them. I want to take that market data that I used in my strategic planning and I want to use that to start building out some maps and some approach of how do I break it into individual territories and how do I build equitable territories as I go through this. Here's where the detailed data is so helpful. And historical data becomes very helpful too. So if you've got where my sales have been going for existing customers, what are the leads that have been coming in, what types of leads have been coming in, all that can be helpful as I start figuring out how to break them into individual territories. Where you can get your funnel history, that's obviously a very important one to have as well. And your funnel is everything from the touches to the opportunities that were created, to my wins, to my loss ratios, to how many does it take to ultimately get to a sale. So I can start using that to backfill and feedback to marketing to say, my typical ratio is 7 to 1. It takes 7 leads to get to 1 sale. Marketing, as you're doing your planning for next year, I need you to generate 3,500 leads in order to get to my 500 sales that I'm looking for next year. So let's think about what's the best way to get those leads out there. What are the most effective leads that are out there? So again, this can help for each of the groups that you want to kind of push out there. And then as you think about your planning for next year, how do you want to put your number out there for next year, right? Is it a simple, I want to add a percentage onto this year, which is kind of often the typical way that's dictated down to you maybe from your CFO. I want 10% growth. You figure out how to go get there, and you got to figure out, okay, is my higher ed team going to get 15%? My transactional team going to get 5%? How am I going to get there? That's often the way to go. But where you often want to get to is either the market opportunity, which is, I think there are 400 buyers in the market every year. How do I cover those 400? Or if it's a very small number and it's very easy to get your arms around, can I get to account level planning? So I can do a really bottoms up to say, in enterprise sales, which I know Dave Schatz has kind of lived through, how many of those do I need that are University of Michigan, Harvard, and a couple others? There's 5 that are out there. I think I can get 3 of them next year by putting the account level bubble up planning that are out there. So in order to move to the opportunity level, that's where I've got to have good history. I've got to have a good funnel to know how many people are in market, how many I'm working on, because I know it's a 2-year sales cycle. Those are the kind of things I want to pull in to my planning for next year. Again, if it's enterprise, it's much easier to think about those. Talked a number about kind of collecting the data. But once you've gotten this data, then it becomes very easy to look for those hot spots of where those opportunities are. So the example I gave you a few minutes ago, in the higher ed market, maybe I identified as I was looking at some of the historical data, Baptist-oriented schools were buying at a faster pace than other schools that are out there. That's a hot spot I identified that I could say, either I want to put a particular sales rep on it because I think there's a greater opportunity to penetrate that particular market out there. I want to generate more marketing leads because I think Baptist-oriented schools have this problem in spades, and they could use my service to help them in a faster pace. But looking at these hot spots at this data can help me do these drill downs to figure out where there's opportunity and where I can potentially build up market opportunities and territories out of it. Here's an example of a tool that I used. Again, I may change the numbers to protect the innocent, but I did a lot of my analysis in Excel because it was kind of the easiest one to adjust and tweak as you went through your what-if analysis. But you want to be able to take all that segmentation data that I had earlier, which is, let's take this prospect database, let's pivot it out by, in this particular case, I broke it out by state, and then a roll-up by state into what I called a region. And into the revenue categories of each of the ones out there. And then you can break out by customers versus prospects. You can start building out and saying, in Alabama, ones that earn less than $1 million a year, there's 256 of those that are existing customers. But from a prospect point of view, there's 2,200 that are out there that earn less than $1 million a year. I can drill into each one of those, and then I can set up some targets over to the right, and then using just some roll-up capability, I can kind of see, when I built the Southeast territory, I've got 4,700 customers and 30,000 prospects, and when I took a first cut at the Northeast, based on the states, I could see I've got a lot more customers and a lot more prospects that are out there. So I can start doing some what-if to say, okay, what if I pull out District of Columbia and move it up to the Southeast? So all I do is I have to do a simple, mapping of DC equals SE, repivot, and then I can get an analysis and say, okay, now it took the Southeast up to 5,500 and it took Northeast down to 6,500. Is that equitable? Is it reasonable? Can I get a person to cover all of the opportunities that are in play? So can one person touch 50,000 accounts? Well, we know they can't. But for the market I want to go after, it's above the 6 million, so can one person touch 944? Yeah, okay, I feel like they can do that. That's a good number. I want to lock in and say the Northeast is made up of these 5 states and the Southeast is made up of these 10 states, and then take it to my next level of starting to build quotas and things out of it. Make sense? Okay. All right, so the next step is, how do I take the market plan, this territory plan that I put in place, and say what states make up and what particular part of the market that I want to segment that's out there. How do I kind of now take that and build it into a plan that I'm going to give an individual to say, here's your plan for the next 12 months. So again, just a breadcrumb to kind of plant a couple seeds. So before we dive into it, so one of the fundamental questions you have to ask is, am I going to over-assign quota or not? And what I mean by that is, if everybody gets a quota of $1 million and I've got 5 salespeople, the math says it's $5 million that I'm going to generate. But is that the number you're given? Have you been given a number of $5 million, or do you have a number that's more like $4,500,000? So there's some coverage for shortfalls, right? I have turnover in my territories, I have underperformance, I have unknowns that are out there. So fundamental question is, do you oversign or not? And it's definitely a philosophical question. In my last company, we did overassign quotas. So we took and we added 5% to a rep and 2% to a manager to get to their numbers, but the number for the business unit was a smaller number that was added up. So if it's not a big number, and it depends on how fast you're growing too, and how many unknowns you have that are out there. So I can't say there's an easy rule of thumb of what you ought to apply. It worked for us because we had enough history that told us what the numbers were going to look like on a year-over-year basis to cover the turnover that you get from sales reps, or the unknowns that you didn't have out there that help us get to our quota number. So it's not a big difference. If it's a big delta, if it's a 30% delta, you start to get into demoralizing the sales team. Hey, I can't ever get to my number. Why am I even going to try? So again, philosophical, you got to think through that. As you think about, again, what quota number do you want to get, if you got some historical data you can look at, it's a big range, but you ought to get kind of 50 to 75% of your reps hitting your quota. If you looked at kind of 2009, 2010, that was a stretch, right? It was kind of a crummy time of year. 30% might have been a number that I heard and saw, as because I was living through that time period. Might have been kind of the numbers you saw out there. So you had to think of other ways to incent the sales team. They're not making their earnings, they're not hitting their number, they're both financially driven and they're competitively driven. You got to figure out other ways to kind of get them there when you have kind of market conditions. But you ought to get kind of in that range that are out there. And then you ought to have some high level, who are the best reps that are out there. The top 10% is a pretty consistent number I've seen that are out there that's on the President's Club trip, or the people that get the extra recognition. That ought to be a rough number that, as you look into my last performance, am I getting 10% of the team that's getting to that number? From a comp point of view, again, I'm planting a seed here. You want to think about, because again, it gets back to the motivational issue, not just the delivery side around quotas. You want to think about, what's my portion of fixed to variable. So you want to, and it's going to depend on your particular product set. So again, I don't have a great rule of thumb here, but you got to think about, if it's new business, it's probably a higher portion variable comp. If it's existing business where they're helping customers and making sure they're getting things done, probably a lower percentage, because you want to pay them for just doing the transactional things that are out there. So that'll vary based on the team. So as you go back and think about, how do I build teams out and kind of structure them, this will come into play. So you got to be thinking about that as you put that in place. A common number, I won't say it's the best number, but a common one I've seen is kind of 70% base, 30% variable. But again, I won't say that's the best that are out there. My past experience for the analytics division, our team was kind of 55% base, 45% variable, based on, and there's all kind of sophisticated things you can think about of how do I put accelerators in there to incent them different ways. Sales guys will optimize their performance based on your sales plan. So you got to make sure you put the right plan out there and adjust it. But again, it's related to how I put a territory in place, how would I put teams in place that are out there. So you got to be thinking about it. So how do I take all this information that's out there and how do I start measuring myself against it? So, and this is the important part I wanted for those of you maybe that don't do the strategic part of it now, but you want to be able to put these things in place. What data should I be collecting now to help me when I want to do the strategic plan next year to start building this all the way down? So I want you to think about this, even if you haven't done the strategic plan part of it. So what data should I be collecting along the way and measure myself? So key part is you want to get those metrics up front as much as you can, right? So you want to figure out what I need to collect, because if you're down the road, you think, oh, I should have gotten, what's the title of the person that the lead came in on? So it'll help me identify, are they the potential buyer category? If you don't start collecting that up front, it's going to be harder for you to measure against the road, obviously. So think about that as much as you can up front so you can define that, put it into your CRM or your spreadsheets, whatever you're using, to make sure I'm collecting as much of this data up front. So some examples that I'll talk through with some reports as we go through this are, what are my opportunities or my at-bats? How many of those am I getting and what types am I getting so that I can figure out how many leads do I need in order to get to an opportunity. The funnel, right? So again, related to my leads, how many are it at different stages along the way so I can make sure I'm measuring my effectiveness that's out there. The lead source, where did the lead come from? So all leads are not equal leads, and I want to be able to know what are the highest performing leads so that I think about my investment in marketing. I want to put more into the higher performing leads that are out there. So the source the lead came in on. Time to close. So again, as you're looking at continually improving your sales cycle, is my time to close reducing? Am I doing a better job of articulating the problem statement, the value proposition to the prospects that are out there? I want to measure that and track it along the way. Win-loss, which I think is a very important tool both for sales management as well as marketing to help you understand what's working, what's not, and where do I need to make mid-course corrections. I think that's a very important one. And then, again, you got to think about, this is more of a data hygiene issue, but you got to be thinking about, especially in the enterprise world, how do I relate parent and child out there? So that I don't, for Harvard University, there's Harvard University Medical Schools, Harvard University Divinity School. Those could be two different buyers that are in there. Do I want to look at the individual buyers, or am I looking at Harvard school in total? So you got to be thinking about, how do I measure and track the leads that are coming in against that. So as I measure, here's an example of kind of what a funnel might look like. As I measure the different parts that are coming through, how many do I need in order to get to the number of customers is what I was talking through. The awareness level, kind of pre-funnel is often the hardest one to measure. It's the eyeballs, the pre-leads, but it's something you want to put in place is, maybe it's how many I'm putting out on an annual level, and then how many leads or opportunities come out as a result of it. But it's something, again, you want to proactively think about and track how many there are. And then the big thing is you want to figure out, let's have clear rules for all this data that I'm collecting. Because the toughest thing is, if I had 100 leads last year and I have 200 leads this year, but my definition of what was called the lead changed midterm, 100 versus 200 becomes pretty meaningless unless I've got a clear set of rules of what is a lead. So in this, I made one up, but you might say it's somebody in my target market, Baptist schools and higher ed, that have a problem of reducing annual income, that they want it solved. The person's got the authority and the budget in order to solve that problem within a period. Let's call it 6 months. We might call that a lead. If it's somebody else that's just, kicking the tires, or somebody's asked a question that might be an awareness, or it might be something you make as part of a drip campaign, but you might not call that a lead, right? So you got to think about, let's call these what we want to measure them on an ongoing basis.
Chris, can you back up just a minute? And
Uh-huh.
on the awareness, are you referring to how potential customers become aware of your product, or how you become aware of potential customers? I'm just a little dense on that one.
Yeah, sure. So I'm talking about prospective customers.
Okay.
So how do I get the market aware of my opportunity,
Okay.
right? So it's kind of, it's pre-lead. How do I get the word out? So a couple spreadsheets here I'll kind of walk you through. Again, a consistent theme you'll see. A lot of what I use was kind of pivot table approaches to collect, summarize the data, to kind of look for opportunities that were out there. So in this particular case, I'm looking at a number of products that were out there. So it's the same thing of products and penetration. So this is kind of customers that were out there. So what I might look at in higher ed, in a particular revenue segment, I might see that I've got almost 20% penetration at a lower level. As I move up, again, going back to my pyramid, more sophisticated buyers really ought to be the ones buying this particular product. It's at 5%. So I've now got a hot spot. I want to drill in and say, is it a particular region of the country that's a particular problem? Is it pervasive across all the different parts of it? So it could be a problem solution, it could be a sales execution, it could be a product level. But until I have looked to see where the opportunity is, I don't know where I want to go, or potentially do a deeper dive to figure out where the problem might be. The next one's kind of around the lead generation. So this is a report I'd give back to marketing. I'd measure the sales team against, but I'd give back to marketing to say, again, are you guys investing in the right particular area? So this is where I mentioned the lead source is a very important piece of data to collect to know where my leads came from. So this can help me understand what are the best performing leads that I've got. This particular cut is account only. It's not a revenue aspect to it, but it's where the leads were created in any given year. So I can see what the status, I kept a reasonable status across the period. I can see how many sold of the leads that were created in 2001, who created them. So I've got them grouped into sales, face-to-face, mass market, and then I can see what the net change is over here, which is kind of the big driver. So I can see from 11 to 12, I had an increase of 81% in rep-initiated leads overall. And if I look at the win percentage of sold versus total, I can start to see what are the leads that have closed at a higher rate. So it's one piece of, is it a good lead to be getting, and do I want to invest more in this particular lead? So in this case, I'm down here. Let's look at the 64% number. So client-generated leads, while it's a small number, as a percentage is one of the better sold leads that are out there. So I want to make sure marketing is doing as good job as they can to say, what kind of client referrals can you be getting in? Can you do a better job of a referral program where there's a spiff back to the rep, to the clients that kind of get those in? So I'd say that's a great number lead metric. I do the same thing on a dollars sold level too. So you can start to see what the average sales price is for the leads that were sold. And I can start to see, the marketing web seminar, this is a bad example, but web seminar might be a $50,000 lead, and the client referral might be a $10,000, so it's an add-on maybe. And I might go, okay, I need to do more web seminars, higher lead sold. I want to invest more in those. So again, if you look at the dollars versus the count, you might get some different answers, but because I've got this raw data that I can look at a number of different ways, the lead source can be very important to get back to. Is it meeting the segment that I want to go after? And is it delivering on the value that I want to get overall as well? Win-loss, I mentioned, was one of the ones I looked at a lot. This is a little busy chart, but it helps me understand my at-bats, right? So when I went against, in this particular version, I'm looking at a competitor. I'm calling them competitor 1. How did I do? So if I do a good job of tracking, did I win the lead? So as I close it out, I ask the reps, you either got to say, did you win or lose? If you lost, who did you lose to, and what reason did you lose for? So I can look at this data and trend over time. So I'm in the red, so in the most part, I'm beating competitor 1 at a period where they started beating me in the middle of the summer, came back. From a concerning point of view, if I look at the trend, there's a lot of ups and downs. My percentage of wins, started up here at 70% and probably was down to 66%. So something's going on, right? So I've got to do a deeper dive into why am I losing? Why is my win rate not going up or at least staying steady? So I got to do a deeper dive, and this would then drive to I need somebody to do a post call. Right? So what I would do is I'd get marketing research, or I'd do it myself to call the person that I lost the business to. And a lot of times they're happy to get on the phone and give you feedback. Was it a sales execution problem, which we can fix, we can work on? Is it a product problem, which we can work on? We need to understand what that is. But to me, it was one of the best data points to figure out, am I going after the right market? Do I have the right value proposition for that market that's out there? Am I solving their particular problem? And give me feedback on what are the things that's working or not working. So I religiously looked at the lost sales report. We get kind of a textual version of it for whoever did the call report that was very helpful. And you looked at that you can't look at one individually, but over a pattern of time, you can start to see, is there something going on? So to me, it was one of the better pieces of data to help understand both, am I executing against my plan right, and where are there hot spots that I may need to work on. And lastly, I'll kind of wrap it up with this, is you got to think about if you're relying on the data to help you build a plan and execute against the plan, it's the old silly adage of garbage in, garbage out. You got to have good standards, good data in order to rely on that information going forward. So you got to put the right processes in place to make sure the data is being kept up and somebody owns the data. So, the hygiene's key. So especially when you got a large customer base you're going after, and you got, kind of this database you licensed or you've collected over time, as you look at, a lot of times you'll rent lists or you'll look at other ways, or are there other prospects I'm missing? I would just emphasize, be very careful, we didn't do this enough, really making sure that it's really incremental, right? Again, going back to the Harvard example I gave you, Harvard Divinity School versus, Kennedy School of whatever it is. You could choose, if you don't match exactly on the name, you could add extra accounts that are out there. And people are chasing their tails of, is there really a separate account? Or are these the same account that's just slightly different names? You got to be really careful about, before you add that back to your prospect database, is it really a valid list you want to be adding? Come up with your standards, right? Come up with a definition of what are the interactions that are out there. So as you want to collect and track and measure, you want to be thinking about what are the contacts, or what are the outcomes, or what are the actions. So if I want to measure from outbound touches to prospects, and I want to measure people that are touching them, I want to make sure that data is collected at a level that I can analyze overall. So what I mean by that is, do I want to get, did they contact the person? Did they express interest? Do they want a follow-up call, or is there no interest? So I can say, is the effectivity of the outbound marketing working? Because I can use those individual data points along the way. So you got to define the standards up front before you start having people collect that in your CRM. And then lastly, I'd just say, make sure everybody's using the same data and documenting what they're doing against that data. Again, if you've got a big database, you want to make sure it's clearly defined of what version of the database I'm using and what criteria that I use to pull that data that's out there. So I might say I'm only looking at prospects that are higher ed, that have a revenue level above 50,000. I want to see that at the bottom of the report, so that I'm chasing and saying, why did you get 400 and you got 450? You got to make sure you're being consistent in how I'm doing it. So as everybody's using the same central database and the same rules, it makes it easier. So as long as you understand where people are going. So again, follow as many of these, define them as clearly as you can up front. Questions? Yes, sir.
Marketing automation, Marketo, Silverpop, do you use any of those tools for this process?
Yeah, so Blackbaud started using Marketo later in the stage. Didn't do a really good job on the analytics. Don't know if it was us or it was Marketo. I know it was data was a lot of the challenge of how do I get it and be consistent. It was one of those tools that was not integrated with the rest of the system. It was kind of marketing did it on its own. A lot of the data I'm talking about here kind of came out of the CRM. So it was what was the lifeblood of what sales did. It's what we did our analysis off of. If you've got a good tool that you can use the same, going back to my bottom point, using the same data and who are my prospects, and who are my pursuits, I think it would be a great tool to kind of, or a great approach on how to go do it and then measure the effectiveness of it. I think a lot of those tools are really around how do I manage a marketing plan, a drip campaign, a communication approach with prospects pre-engaging a salesperson, I think is where I saw it was most valuable. So where the tool can help automate, hey, I need to drop another email to this person and invite them to the next webinar or to check in. I think a tool like a Marketo or Silverpop or one of those guys is great for that kind of thing. And I'm sure they got great analytics to help you analyze the effectiveness of those kind of campaigns. Is that what you're asking?
I guess, yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Take one last question. David?
This is great for Blackbaud. Most of the folks in here, I'm assuming, don't have the history that Blackbaud has, don't have the product, the data.
Yep.
So can you give me your thoughts on, maybe not so much my situation where we have a ton of disparate products that don't really have any theme together.
Sure.
But you're launching a product, it's the first year out, you've got limited resources, you don't have marketing communications, you don't have all those resources that Blackbaud has. Well, give me your thoughts, top 3 things that somebody should be doing to do this without all these resources.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's kind of, to some degree, I wanted to plant the seed at the end of here's data you should be collecting to help you get to future planning out there. So collect your win-loss data, right? That's so important for you to understand, am I hitting the market and hitting the mark along the way? So I'd say the end part of the presentation would be, let's make sure we're thinking collecting the right data. If I go back to, way at the beginning, I would say, I'm not getting a residual for recommending this book, but the methodology I found around, bear with me, around customer development methodology, I thought was kind of spot on. It's a great book. You can get it on Amazon. There's actually a PDF version that you can get for somebody that's trying to validate, is it a good market to pursue? Am I hitting it right? I think this is really simple, and it helps you understand same concept of what's the problem that the person's got and what solution, how does my solution solve that particular problem? I thought this was great because it iterates through a couple of different ways to get there. So customer development, you can Google it and find it. There's a couple of books on Amazon that are great. I think the newest one, it's Brant. One of the authors is Brant. They got a website around it as well. There's the Entrepreneur around customer development. But if you search on customer development, great set of books. It's all about you got a great product. You're not quite sure what that product is going to solve. How do I iterate through to make sure I understand? I've crafted a clear solution to a problem. I figure out what the problem is along the way. So it's the theme in all these things is you got to have a problem you're solving. That's what people are paying for.
All right, we'll wrap, and Chris will be with us for a few minutes, I guess. So he'll have a couple of questions. That would be fine, Chris, if you don't mind.
Yep, happy to stay
The
around.
other thing I want to let you all know is that what I appreciate, I guess, David, it's interesting your comment, but what I appreciate, I guess, is just the pure structure. What a structured approach. You get people who've done the sales presentation and start with sales. How to get the sales, and this is, I've never seen the kind of structure and thought, that goes into it. And you just took WAG and made it a formula, now it's a formulaic, it's not, it's kind of WAG. So that was kind of good. The presentations, both video the mic shooting, and the PowerPoint reside on Fridays of the quarter. If you go to the CDC site, click on Fridays. And there are some great presentations on that. I would encourage you to take a look. Just go to previous. That'll be live on Monday. Some of it will be live today. I guess but it's on there. So and look at some of they've been on the sales presentations and such. And one of the things, David, to your point, it's interesting that you asked the question. I mean, I'm a little more familiar with the commercial products that Spark's developing, and we at the Digital Quarter right now are starting to develop more products. If you will, we've got a new talent portal coming online. We've got an angel fund coming out, so the products that kind of So I really enjoyed this presentation, and I'm looking for the same kind of guidance that you're looking for. And I think the other observation I would make, and I think Chris, this is some of the products that David and I are developing come into a very crowded market space. So I think the value probably you've got to talk above some of that noise that's already in the marketplace. I don't know if you would agree with that, but that's my assessment.
Yeah, I mean, you guys Blackwell is a juggernaut. So imagine if one of us was starting a nonprofit CRM, how hard it would be to compete with Blackwell.
Yeah.
With limited resources, limited market awareness. It's you can do all the analysis you want, but at the end of the day, no one knows about me. Everybody knows about Blackwell's products. It's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
And the next thing is I want John LaCour is with us. John is going to be presenting at the June Fridays on cybersecurity, and it seems to be a topic. I don't know, for some reason, at least for me, after the state got hacked, it was like Hurricane Hugo. Now, hurricane comes along, I'm really respectful of what can happen. So, but John's going to do a presentation that I think is really, kind of separating fact from fiction. And all this hype and people trying to, there's emails that we get now. Hey, you might want to protect yourself and that kind of thing. So I think that he is one of our very successful flagship residents, and now FS2 residents, and will soon be graduating. But he'll be presenting in June, I guess, in the third week of June. And I'm looking forward to that presentation. So thank you, John. And last but not least, I guess many of you already have the email from me that Amy has, congratulate Amy for her position. She's accepted at ECPI University. She's been a great, project manager, program manager for the last 3+ years, and so we're going to miss her. And replacing Amy is Carolyn Finch, who is going to be taking Amy's role as program manager. So we're excited to welcome Carolyn to the CDC family. Many of you guys get to know her. And there's there's Alex right there. I say little, I don't like, but Alex is. I called my good friend at the Center for Entrepreneurship at the College of Charleston. And I said, listen, we're looking for a top-notch intern to kind of work over here. And he said, well, I've got two. And some of Alex's name was the other one that came over. And so obviously he had one that he obviously preferred. And Alex Pappas came to work for us, I guess, 3 months ago. And just did, has done a phenomenal job. And so it just goes back. I tell people, I say, maybe I'm starting to rethink the best way to bring people in is to bring them as interns. You get to see, get to try it before you buy, so to speak. And she's really proved herself. So she got promoted at the same time, I guess, and both of them will officially start on Monday as project assistant. Emails, contacts, and everything else, anything you want from us, it's Ernest, Carolyn, and Alex, at charlestondigitalcore.com or charlestonbusinessdevelopment.com. And you can get to us, and we're looking forward to continuing these wonderful presentations. And again, I want to congratulate Amy for being a part of this program and our overall program, if you will. So thanks for coming out. Chris will be around for a few minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.